So before we begin today's tour, I do want to recognize the Haudenosaunee people on whose ancestral homeland we are located here at Fenimore Art Museum. James Fenimore Cooper was one of America's first great novelists, and Thomas Cole inspired one of the country's first distinctive art movements, the Hudson River School. In the midst of a young country that was discovering itself, their work shaped a view of the rugged and sublime American landscape that remains an influence to this day. During this tour, we will explore our museum's expansive collections relating both to Cooper and the Hudson River School. And for those of you who perhaps have never been to our museum before, that is a photograph of the museum, which was actually constructed in the early 1930s as a residence for a man named Edward Severin Clark. But it's been a museum ever since 1945. Here we go. We'll begin our exploration of this story by discussing not only the patriarch of the Cooper family, but of the village of Cooperstown itself, William Cooper. Cooper began his career as a wheelwright near Philadelphia, but became a land speculator after the American Revolution, eventually acquiring tens of thousands of acres in upstate New York. In 1786, he founded the village of Cooperstown and this at the southern tip of Otsego Lake, where we are now. And this is a painting of Otsego Lake made back in around 1879 to 1883 by Edward Gay. As I look outside the window right now, I can see that the lake is currently completely frozen over. But he moved with his wife, Elizabeth Fenimore, and their children to this location in 1790. William Cooper was also involved in government, becoming the first judge of Otsego County, where Cooperstown is located, and later a representative of the Federalist Party in the United States Congress. Cooper's letters about his experiences in upstate New York were published in A Guide in the Wilderness in 1810. And going back to this portrait of William Cooper, this is by Gilbert Stuart, who was best known for his paintings of George Washington. And this was probably painted at the Artist Studio in Philadelphia in 1794, which at the time was the seat of the United States Congress. In William Cooper's hand, you can actually see a map of Cooperstown, and the actual layout of the village has not strayed much from this original map that William Cooper is holding. The streets are very much laid out in the same way, and the village is not much larger. Well, it's a little bit larger than it was back then. I think we're at about 2,000 people population right now. So this painting by Gilbert Stuart resembles other portraits that he made at this time, like this portrait on the right of banker William Bayard, who interestingly was good friends with Alexander Hamilton, and he was brought to his home after the famous duel with Aaron Burr, where he died from his wounds. Gilbert Stuart was the leading portrait painter in the United States from the 1790s until his death in 1828. And as I mentioned, he's best known for his portraits of George Washington. So William Cooper's sixth and best known son was James Fenimore Cooper, who was considered to be one of America's first novelists, though he never intended to be a writer. Born in 1789, he spent his childhood exploring the land around Otsego Lake and interacting with settlers in the Mohawk in the area. And at age 13, he enrolled at Yale University, but was expelled in his third year after taking part in a dangerous prank. So eventually he became a sailor on a merchant ship and eventually joined the US Navy, reaching the rank of midshipman. He left service in 1810. After his marriage to Susan Augusta Delancey, he returned to Cooperstown and settled at Fenimore Farm, which was a farmhouse that was actually on the current site of the Fenimore Art Museum today. And he tried his hand as a gentleman farmer. And then on a dare from his wife, Cooper wrote his first novel, Precaution, in 1820. It was published anonymously and was an imitation of a domestic story like that of Jane Austen. It met with little recognition, but he went on to write over 30 more books, most famously the adventure series known as the Leatherstocking Tales, which started with the Pioneers in 1823. Some of James Fenimore Cooper's writings can be seen as illuminations of his childhood experiences in and around Lake Otsego and the surrounding area. Here is his wife's favorite portrait of him, painted by John Wesley Jarvis in New York City in 1822. This depicts Cooper just before the success of The Spy, a Revolutionary War adventure novel published in 1821 that established him as one of America's leading authors. Cooper's novels inspired many artists in the 19th century who created images depicting scenes from the books. Here we see an example of a print by Tompkins Harrison Madison showing a scene from the Pioneers, which in 2023 celebrated its 200th anniversary. The novel is set in the imaginary village of Templeton, a very thinly veiled version of Cooperstown, and introduced readers to the character of Natty Bumppo, a fiercely independent frontiersman who grew up alongside Delaware Indians and had many nicknames, including the Deerslayer, Hawkeye, and most famously, Leatherstocking. John Kydor was one of a few early American artists to attempt humor in his artwork. Leatherstocking Meets the Law, seen here, is based on a scene from The Pioneers. It depicts the comical incident in which Hiram Doolittle attempts to inspect Leatherstocking's hut for gold. Kydor shows Doolittle's sprawling form heaved from the threshold by Leatherstocking, while Jotham Riddle flees and Billy Kirby falls into gales of laughter. The episode eventually leads to Leatherstocking's unjust imprisonment. The Last of the Mohicans, the next novel in the Leatherstocking Tales series, released in 1826 and became an instant phenomenon. And due to the massive popularity of the Leatherstocking Tales, many artists like Kydor and Madison were commissioned to depict scenes or knew that if they incorporated Cooper's tales into their compositions, they were sure to sell. Some artists, like Felix Octavius Carr Darley, were hired by publishers to illustrate special editions of Cooper's novels. These are two examples of preparatory sketches done by Darley, one of Leatherstocking on the left, and the other for an illustrated edition of Cooper's novel, The Red Rover. Unlike other books in Cooper's Leatherstocking Tales, which are set in New York State, his book, The Prairie, is set in Western territories with expansive space that Easterners could scarcely fathom. Originally titled Friend or Foe, this painting depicts Leatherstocking at the center and two companions looking at a thin wisp of smoke rising from the trees in the distance. The painter, James William Glass Jr., was born in Spain, where his father was British consul. He was raised in America and began working for the U.S. Coast Survey and Fortification Service. In 1844, he decided on a painting career, working under Henry Inman and Daniel Huntington, a successful portrait painter who had been a pupil of Samuel F.B. Morse, who we'll be seeing in just a bit. So, if James Fenimore Cooper was one of the first American authors to romanticize the young country's landscape, Thomas Cole was one of the first American artists to do the same. As a teenager, Cole emigrated to America from Lancashire in northwestern England with his family in 1818, and after some time spent as an itinerant portrait artist in Ohio and Pittsburgh, he made his way to New York City, finding his muse in the landscape of the Catskill Mountains after a trip up the Hudson River. Cole was friends with James Fenimore Cooper and was particularly influenced by Cooper's writings. When Cole was commissioned by the prominent collector Robert Gilmore Jr. to paint, quote, some known subject from Cooper's novels to enliven the landscape, he chose a scene from The Last of the Mohicans, where Cooper describes the location as, and this is a quote from Cooper's novel, one of those steep pyramidal hills which bear a strong resemblance to artificial mounds and which so frequently occur in the valleys of America. The one in question was high and precipitous, its top flattened as usual, but with one of its sides more than ordinarily irregular. It possessed no other apparent advantage for a resting place than in its elevation and form, which might render defense easy and surprise nearly impossible. And if you know anything about Cooper's writings, if you've read any of his Leatherstocking Tales, you know just how much Cooper loves to describe the landscape. Cole's ambitions for this painting reflected his ambitions for landscape painting in general. Cole manipulated the natural forms of the rocks and trees to increase the tension in the painting, placing a boulder high above the scene in which Cora and other captives plea for their lives. The rock's precarious balance over an area of sacred ground for the depicted Native Americans becomes a metaphor for the fate that awaits the captives. Painted less than a year after the novel's publication, Cole's work marked the first in a long line of landscape paintings based upon Cooper's famous novels. This particular landscape created by Cole does not faithfully depict the contours of Lake George, where the novel's scene is set, but rather incorporates various sketches of Mount Chocorua and Lake Winnipesaukee that Cole had made from trips to New Hampshire. In reality, Mount Chocorua on the left and Lake Winnipesaukee on the right are over 30 miles from each other, and so this final painting is a combination of at least two sketches from different locations. And if we go back to the painting, you can see how the mountain influenced that peak in the background, and how you can see Lake Winnipesaukee off in the distance right next to it. This is a very common thing with Hudson River School painters to kind of make compositions based on sketches from different places to create a landscape that was even more grand and sublime. Cole and Cooper became acquainted with one another in New York City, where they were both members of the Bread and Cheese Club, which Cooper had founded. The club had many influential members ranging from artists and writers to other professionals, including Washington Irving, Fitz Greene Halleck, Henry Inman, Samuel F.B. Morse, and William Cullen Bryant. These two portraits are our homage to the Bread and Cheese Club, with one portrait depicting fellow club member Fitz Greene Halleck, done by other club member Henry Inman, and the one on the right was painted by member Samuel F.B. Morse, depicting Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, the founder of English Renaissance poetry, credited with introducing the sonnet to England. Although it is unknown when Samuel F.B. Morse painted this portrait, or the source he referenced for the likeness, it was painted for James Fenimore Cooper. Morse, the inventor of Morse code and the telegraph, originally set out to be an artist and painted numerous portraits of notable figures. He and Cooper were close friends who traveled in Europe together, and in the painting on the left, used him and his wife as models enjoying the sights of the Louvre. That painting on the left is the only one in this presentation that's not part of our museum's collection. Morse also visited Cooperstown, including in 1829 when he painted several portraits of prominent residents here, including this lovely likeness on the right of Catherine Ann Russell Nelson, wife of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Nelson. The Hudson River School was America's first true artistic fraternity. Its name was coined to identify a group of New York City-based landscape painters that emerged about 1850 under the influence of Thomas Cole and flourished until about the time of the centennial. Cole, featured in the museum's collection along with Asher B. Durand and Thomas Doughty, were all prominent members of the school, and they influenced a generation of landscape painters. And actually, since this script was written, we've added a couple more very important Hudson River School painters to our collection, including Frederick Church. And if you want to see the Frederick Church painting in our collection, you can join our American Masterworks virtual tour in a couple of weeks. So, as the name suggests, the first wave of the movement focused heavily on depictions of the Hudson River Valley region and surrounding areas of New York, including the Adirondacks, Catskills, and White Mountains of New Hampshire. Thomas Cole himself had a very specific view of the American landscape, which he strove to depict in his paintings, a reverence for the sublime quality of the land combined with a cautionary view towards its sustainability due to the advancement in industry he saw living in New York City. In 1836, he wrote an essay on the subject in which he says, quote, "I cannot but express my sorrow that the beauty of such landscapes are quickly passing away. The ravages of the axe are daily increasing. The most noble scenes are made desolate, and oftentimes with a wantonness and barbarism scarcely credible in a civilized nation. The wayside is becoming shadeless, and another generation will behold spots, now rife with beauty, desecrated by what is called improvement, which as yet generally destroys nature's beauty without substituting that of art. Nature has spread for us a rich and delightful banquet. Shall we turn from it? We are still in Eden. The wall that shuts us out of the garden is our own ignorance and folly. This painting, View on the Schoharie, is a wonderful example of the manner in which Thomas Cole combines the sublime with the cautionary. This landscape shows a relaxed man overlooking a vast panorama of wooded hills. The lightning-ravaged tree in the foreground serves as a reminder of death, both of man and of nature. Note how the light on the settled valley and the village of Esperance, New York, contrasts with the dark intensity of the passing storm. Could the storm represent the ravages of industry upon the land? A largely self-taught artist, Cole purposely composed his landscapes to portray images that delivered strong messages to his patrons and public, while simultaneously providing beautiful images of the American wilderness that patrons would want to hang on their walls. Another member of the Hudson River School was Asher B. Durand, who was also very good friends with Thomas Cole and James Fenimore Cooper. This is his Hudson River looking towards the Catskills, painted in 1847. Compared to other works by Durand, this painting is unusually large, and we can see that it depicts people enjoying the pastoral beauty and tranquility of the Hudson River near Rhinecliff, New York. The graceful forms of the trees seem to offer shelter and lead the eye of the viewer to the picturesque Catskill Mountains in the distance. As the 19th century went on, painters like Albert Bierstadt and Frederick Church took the Hudson River School aesthetic to even grander scales, turning their largest canvases into spectacles meant to rival even the locations they were inspired by. By the 1870s, however, new art styles from Europe, Impressionism in particular, made these landscape paintings look dated by comparison, and the Hudson River School artists were largely forgotten by the turn of the 20th century, only to be rediscovered and reassessed around the 1950s. So bringing things back to here in Cooperstown, let's discuss how the landscape our museum overlooks fits into the narrative of both Cooper and Cole. Otsego Lake has been referred to by James Fenimore Cooper as a glimmering glass or glimmer glass, which instills the idea of tranquility echoed in Thomas Cole's essay on American scenery, where he writes, I would not speak of the Great Lakes, but of those smaller lakes such as Lake George, Champlain, Winnipesaukee, Otsego, Seneca, and 100 others that stud like gems the bosom of this country. Otsego Lake, while not as popular as areas like Lake George or the Catskill Mountains, still inspired landscape painters following in the footsteps of Thomas Cole, and even today, that respect for the lake and what it provides us is shared among the residents of Cooperstown and the thousands of visitors who come each year to relax by its shores. Finally, we would be very remiss not to discuss the important work of Susan Fenimore Cooper, James Fenimore Cooper's eldest daughter, born in 1813. She was her father's assistant in his writing, but she was a prolific writer as well. Her most well-known publication is called Rural Hours, published in 1850 and considered to be a forerunner of works such as Thoreau's Walden in its portraiture of the seasons, nature, and life in pastoral New York State. In Rural Hours, Susan Cooper writes this about Cooperstown. And then the village, with its buildings and gardens covering the level bank to the southward, is charmingly placed, the waters spreading before it, a ridge of hills rising on either side, this almost wholly wooded, that partly tilled, while beyond lies a background varied by nearer and farther heights. The little town, though an important feature in the prospect, is not an obtrusive one, but quite in proportion with surrounding objects. It has a cheerful, flourishing aspect, yet rural and unambitious, not aping the bustle and ferment of the cities, and certainly one may travel many a mile without finding a village more prettily set down by the waterside. And I think that a lot of people would say that's still true of our little town here. Susan Fenimore Cooper's devotion to her beloved community continued with the establishment of several charitable organizations, including the Thanksgiving Hospital in 1866 and the Orphan House of the Holy Savior in 1873.